Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 60 Voices podcast. So I'm David Tickner, the Chief Executive of the Civil Service Retirement Fellowship, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the latest episode of our special podcast that's been launched to celebrate the 60th anniversary of the Civil Service Retirement Fellowship in 2025. In this series, we'll be sharing the fascinating stories and personal reflections of former civil servants as they look back on their careers and the impact they had on the nation. 60 Voices aims to conserve and preserve these important work memories. From the challenges they face to the memorable moments that define their work, each episode offers a unique personal insight into the history of the UK civil service and the people who work within it. So joining me as usual for our podcast is my friend and co-host Denise Headley. Denise is the Civil Service Retirement Fellowship's Deputy Chief Executive and has an extensive background in broadcast and commentary, and runs her own successful weekly podcast on politics and global affairs. And for this episode, we are equally delighted to welcome Les Mondry-Flesch. Les joined the civil service in 1980 and spent much of his career working at the Department for Trade and Industry. He's been an active member of the CSRF community since retirement and has held committee roles at the Croydon, Dulwich and Norwood and New Forest groups. He's been an office volunteer helping us with our mail shots and is a proactive member of our online book group. So a big welcome to you, Les.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Les. Good to see you.
So I'm going to kick you off, Les, with a very nice and easy question, I hope, which is what year did you join the civil service?
It was
And
19.
what made you choose it as a career?
Well, it was 1980,
Right.
and I think desperation. I think because I'd been applying for jobs for a long while, and joining the Department of Trade and Industry as a clerical assistant was my 61st job application.
61st. What was
Yes.
your original? What did you want to do originally then?
I wasn't entirely sure. I'd got fond notions of losing myself in the interpreting bureaucracy of the what's now called the European Union, but I didn't have enough French. So I graduated in German studies.
Wow.
And from what was then Portsmouth Polytechnic in 1979.
Yeah.
Basically, I'm rubbish at interviews, or I was then.
Oh, was that? So you actually did an interview for the European Union or the Economic Community, is it?
Yeah, and various haulage groups, computer companies, because they wanted people with languages because you could understand things like Fortran and COBOL and stuff like that. And the other thing that would, because it came into desperation in some respects, is my father worked at Dickey and Sankey's up in Shropshire, where I'm from. And I'd actually been offered a job in the export department there. But if there was one thing I did not want, it was to be the chap who was known as the guy who only got a job because Emil Mondry knew Tom Odmore. And I'm not having that. So in the end, it would be I joined the Department of Trade and Industry, the patent office, in fact.
And do you remember, I mean, your entry process? I mean, that's been an interesting variation. We've spoken to a lot of people about what they remember about the original process. I mean, obviously, you presumably, did you see a job advert for the civil service? Is that what?
Yeah, it was in the Daily Mirror.
The Daily Mirror. Very good.
That's what I was reading here.
And was it an application process followed by a formal interview, or
I had a formal interview.
Did you have to go into London for that, Les?
Yeah.
I
suppose it must have been held in
an hour. He said you was late, an hour late, so you probably
An hour late.
well, that I was an hour late turning up on my first day.
All right.
Because the patent office at that time, it may still be there actually. It was at 25 Southampton Buildings, which is just off Holborn. And being a country boy, and it was not knowing London at all well, I spent ages and ages walking up and down Southampton Row looking for number 25.
And you presume, obviously, you eventually found it. Your memory, you obviously know Jean, who was one of the first people we interviewed through the book group. She had a similar anecdote with hers that she had to go, I think she went down to Bristol for her interview. And she couldn't find where she was supposed to be interviewed. And being the resourceful lady that she is, she rung them from a phone box. and said, "I'm trying to find your location. Can you help me find it?" And the person on the phone said no and hung up. So she had to go through the whole process again. But obviously, you were more successful in finding South.
Yeah, well, my interview was held in Sanctuary Buildings, as it was then called, or as we called it now. I've started working in number 1 Victoria Street Mortuary Buildings. The yeah, that was. But yeah, I mean, the patent office was great fun in some respects, and absolutely dreadful in others, because it was run like a Victorian poorhouse. It was basically a large clerical factory with a few SEOs in and a grade 5. But
Can I just ask you, Les, what was it like coming from the country going to London? Was there a degree of hierarchy, and were you seen as slightly less valuable because you'd come from the country and you weren't from London, and London had that aura of,
well, it didn't take long to discover that there wasn't actually anything much less valuable than a clerical assistant.
Okay.
Well, that's the way I said. That's the way the patent office tended to be run. But it was.
So did you have to say another observation we had from somebody was that they were but not quite the Victorian poorhouse, but they said that when senior people came in the room, everybody had to stand up. Did you have to were you treated a bit like that, or was it?
No, but there were people there who said it wasn't long since that had been the case. But it was. I mean, the lovely thing about that was that amongst the clerical staff, it engendered a great camaraderie by and large.
I imagine.
And that was good.
Did they have like a staff association in that early day? Because
that was my parallel career, was within the trade union side of things. Because if there's one thing I learned from studying German, my favourite playwright is Bertolt Brecht. And auf Deutsch, it's "Wo Recht zu Unrecht wird Widerstand zu Pflicht," where justice becomes injustice, resistance becomes a duty.
Ooh,
Good quote.
like that? I might have to rub that out, Les.
and that was something. I mean, my father was an active trade unionist, and my mum was an active member of what was then still called NUPE. So it was always going to happen, wasn't it?
But at the time you joined, I mean, obviously the relationship between trade unions and civil service has been colourful, should we say, over the years. Was it? I'm choosing my words slightly diplomatically, but was it the same then when you first got involved? I mean, were the unions very proactive in representing and supporting staff, or did it take time to build that bridgehead into obviously?
Well, you could by and large have what I suppose you might call conversations between consenting adults. I mean, there were proper channels, and they were fairly well respected, and I didn't have too much of a problem with my immediate line management in the sense that it was more or less it was them who got me involved, because there were conversations we would have, and it didn't take long for somebody to say you need to get him involved because he actually talks sense, rather than just saying all management are bastards, which was the general consensus amongst the CPSA, as it then was. Activists. So they said, well, actually, no, these people have got their own pressures, and if we're not going to have a sensible conversation with them, they're not going to have a sensible conversation with us.
Yeah.
And then we're not going to speak to the very senior management with one voice, are we? So.
And was that PCS union you were with, or was it?
No, that was the CPSA back in then, and then there was the EOs, HEOs, SEOs, and some grade 7s were in what was the Society of Civil and Public Servants.
So you joined. You went straight in. So you had your interview in London, and you then started at Patent Office in the Victorian buildings.
Yeah.
And then how long were you at the Patent Office for, Les?
Well, I got promoted to clerical officer very, 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 very quickly. I had my first. They were called job appraisal reviews, and I am quoting here. So please do excuse the industrial language, but my HEO called me in, a guy called Mike Needleman, absolutely brilliant bloke. Put the engaged sign up on the door and said, "You're wasting your fucking time here, ain't you, mate?" and because we'd been out drinking fairly frequently, and he told me to apply for the next clerical officer board, and then I moved from one part of the patent. Well, the trademarks registry was the bit that I worked in, which was great fun, absolutely great fun. And I moved. I was the clerical officer in the legal side of things, the legal. So I was basically the bag carrier for the registrar of trademarks.
And what activities were you actually doing in terms of your day-to-day work? What would you be doing?
Well, the first thing I was doing was essentially, it was called extensions of time, because you've got a process from when somebody applies for a trademark. It goes through a process, and then and you've got you had precedents that were set under what was then the Trademarks Act 1938. And these, you had to bundle up these files for the hearing officers for each individual application, and if you the trademark agents who were doing this on behalf of their clients, as often as not, had far too much work on, so they asked for what they were called extensions of time to present their evidence to the to the office, and it was incredibly routine. But the legal section was much more fun. So and a little bit more challenging as well, because you spent quite a lot of time at the high courts when these things went before judges and the chancery, or indeed the hearings held before the registrar of trademarks, where I had to get out all the standard precedents and have all the books laid out and the courtroom laid out and everything. So it was.
So was the process involved then? I mean, I remember from my magazine days getting involved briefly and obviously registering a trademark, and it was a bit of a labyrinthine process. So you're actually working at the patent office, so presumably if someone came along and challenged a ruling, etc., you would be expected to turn up with, or
I had to make sure that all the evidence that they presented was in the right place at the right time, and stuff like that.
And the patent office, was an independent government body, or did it sit as part of DTI?
It was part of the Board of Trade.
Oh, right, okay.
But yes, it was part of the Department of Trade and Industry. What happened just before I left was that the European Patent Office in Munich was established, and an awful lot of the staff decamped to Munich.
Oh wow!
Which was a great shame, because it buggered up our darts team.
But would have been good for you, given that you're fluent in German, I would have thought.
Well, I wanted to leave anyway, because I'd played cricket and I'd played football and I'd seen other parts of the department and places that seemed a bit more exciting.
So where did you go from the patent office? Yeah. What was your next step?
You've got quite a few countries that you went to. I saw Djibouti, Ethiopia, Somalia.
That was later on. Yeah, it's actually somebody in personnel division was probably sacked because they put me onto into what was then still West Germany, exports to West Germany consumer goods. So if I've got German and they've put me on the German section, I mean, that won't do, will it? And then that was good fun as well.
But after the patent office, what route did you go within DTI then? Did you?
Well, in the overseas trade desk.
Oh, the overseas trade.
As they were called, the exports to West Germany, consumer goods, which was quite good.
So you burnt up a few air miles, I would imagine, for that. Did you go back?
Well, I didn't do the air miles. I did one familiarization trip to Düsseldorf, which was quite nice.
Of all the places in Germany, Les, they send you Düsseldorf, most famous for its airport, and probably not much else. Without doing
well, it was a place I knew quite well, because in my student days studying German, I'd actually studied for a year in Duisburg, and Düsseldorf at Altstadt was somewhere that we frequented quite a lot.
Well, it's certainly got quite a few good beer gardens and beer kellers.
I
in
probably
Düsseldorf.
visited them all, David. I probably visited them all.
Can I ask you, what departments did you work for during your whole civil service career, if you were going to list them all?
Well, Department of Trade and Industry, and I did 6 months at the Foreign Office. Well, it probably ended up being 8, didn't it? But yeah, that's because we had a thing called the Overseas Attachment Trainee Scheme, which after I'd done my stint on the East Africa aid thing, which I applied for.
Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Well, I was kind of sold the job under false pretenses, because I was told that I would be dealing with what was still then the Overseas Development Administration and doing a little bit of branch finance work, and it ended up being the other way around, really. And I'm absolutely rubbish at numbers, and I tend to get rather touchy with people who are more interested in the minutiae of process rather than getting something done. But I visited those places which I would never, ever, ever have done in my life, and I'm eternally grateful for that. I had such a good time in Ethiopia, Somalia, Uganda, not quite so much Djibouti, because there's basically we're all there. But that was great.
What was it like going there as somebody who's spent a lot of their time, obviously in England, in the UK, and then you go to somewhere like Ethiopia? I mean, they speak Aramaic over there. It's a very ancient society. So what was that type of relationship like? What do you remember that was poignant about those visits in terms of your work or the people you it shaped you going forward?
Yeah, it's not intended to sound condescending, but I'm sure it will. But incredibly proud people for a start. Absolutely beautiful, beautiful place, and something that kind of went against the grain a bit. Our embassy over there was a little bit like the last days of the raft.
Not surprised.
Yeah, but it was absolutely stunning. That's a stunning place.
And how did that change your worldview after did it change your worldview? Did it impact on your job when you came back, now that you traveled and you'd gone to different parts of the world with effectively the civil service? What was that like when you came back?
Yeah, it certainly meant that you recognize that you should not lump everybody who lives in one country all together as the same, because Ethiopia is not just one place full of Ethiopians. It is a place full of Tigrayans, Eritreans, and as well as the Amhari, and the same with Uganda, with the Akoli, the Baganda, and it also opened my eyes quite considerably, particularly in Somalia, in relation to corruption, and indeed in Uganda.
And how was the relationship, Les, between, I mean, obviously you were seconded for that period. I mean, how did that work? I mean, obviously you were working for, presumably your duration, for the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, even though you were a DTI member.
My time for the Foreign and Commonwealth Office was when I went to The Hague. I was still with DTI, but I'd been sent over there because with certain aid projects that we were meant to be trying to get involved in.
Yeah.
In Somalia, there was some in Mogadishu there was some refurbishment of the port there that needed to be done. In Ethiopia, there was quite a lot of work we were hoping to try and do with irrigation and to weather forecasting. And in Uganda, it was particularly to do with the Owen Falls Dam. And the refurbishment of it is only about a quarter of it was working. And there was an absolutely massive sugar cane refining plant that needed taking down and giving a good rub down and putting back together again. It had been built in Dundee.
Oh, wow.
And the Madvani brothers, who I think are still around, actually, were hoping to. They'd actually gone back because they, of course, had been thrown out by Idi Amin.
You were there during like quite turbulent times, because I think in Ethiopia now they've actually built that dam. I think they've got the dam has been built, and there is still some ructions with Egypt in relation to the Nile. So that
that was always
Yeah.
and was the main reason why it should never have been built.
But I mean, on it now, because I
Yeah.
think now that they've done a lot of work with that in terms of putting that in place. So it's interesting that, you know, you're when you were there, you were doing that kind of infrastructure work.
The thing in Somalia, though, Mohammed Siad Barre was pretty much on his last legs, and you could sense in the air. It's impossible quite to put it into words, but you could just sense that there were people around him that were jockeying for position when he finally popped his clogs. It was quite scary, actually, in some respects.
Mm.
The other thing, of course, is all those beautiful Portuguese buildings that were kind of semi-derelict. Mogadishu, in its strange way, was actually a very pretty city. But and I was interviewed at gunpoint as well. That was quite.
Tell us about that. What happened with that?
There's a bloke called Abdi Hosh who was actually Siad Barre's driver, and he was hoping to kind of bully us into giving him money to establish a country club because it'd start the tourism business. Yeah, right.
And how did the firearm come into the equation?
And he sort of pulled it out, sort of cocked it, and just plonked it on the table and said, "No, Mr. Mondry." And yeah.
So that must have been a little bit somewhat intimidating.
Yeah, it was, but he was never going to do anything, was he?
Oh, was it just a case of showing you the stick?
It was, yeah. Show you who's boss. Yeah, okay, fine. Yeah, I'll make you all the promises you like, mate.
So, did you get a chance to ever go back to any?
No, I didn't. I mean, Somalia fell apart not that long afterwards, anyway. And there were already rumblings when I was there. This was 85, 86. Where there were already rumblings up in Eritrea. Because I think if I remember it correctly, they were after the Eritreans. Basically wanted access to the sea. Is the only port of any significance Ethiopia had was Asmara, isn't it?
I'm not sure. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think it's in Eritrea, and then and that was the under the stranglehold they wanted on the rest of the country. But it's been absolutely horrible since then. It really has.
Well, I think when you just said a minute ago that when you went to those countries, it kind of changed your perception of the world. So we've got a question here, and one of the questions is, how did your work shape your personal life in the ways in which, for argument's sake, it might have changed your views or changed the way you negotiated with people, or, you know, how did that whole experience impact on you? What ink did it leave in your essence, as they say?
I suppose, looking back on it, I guess that I wouldn't necessarily have thought of it quite in those terms then, but looking back on it now with a bit more, and certainly the way that kind of discourse seems to work in binary fashions nowadays, you realise that actually, it's another aspect of what I was saying earlier, that not everybody in Ethiopia is an Ethiopian. Not everybody in Uganda is a Ugandan. The vast majority of conversations that you have with people, and negotiations perhaps, are not necessarily binary. It's not this or that. The grey areas are far bigger than you might think.
But that's the kind of same sort of approach you had when you were talking about the unions, because you were basically saying, okay, it's not a binary approach. They're not all, excuse me, they're not all bastards. They're actually human beings, and they've got consent for.
The other aspect, the other aspect of that, of course, is having to say to these people that, are you so stupid that you don't realise that you'd actually like to be a manager one day?
The CSRF, the Civil Service Retirement Fellowship, is a charity set up for civil servants by civil servants. In 1960, Douglas Houghton MP highlighted the need for an organisation that supported retired civil servants, offering friendship and companionship. 59 years later, we are still carrying on his dream. You can find out more about the CSRF at our website, www.csrf.org.uk. Why not sign up to become a digital donor for £3, less than the price of coffee? Or you may wish to volunteer. Contact us via the website. Oh, go on. No, I'm just thinking out loud, because when Les said that he went over to those countries, he came home and it changed his perception of the world. And I thought that was just a nice little lead into that question and how it impacted you.
Oh, absolutely. When you did come back, did you, I mean, it must have felt a bit like a strange reorientation when you were back in UK working. You went back to DTI after you were on secondment, presumably?
Well, this wasn't a secondment. This was just kind of familiarization.
Familiarization.
Yeah. What I mean, from a purely kind of process point of view, if you like, from a work process point of view, it was as necessary as anything else to actually get to see these places and realize the practicalities, the day-to-day practicalities that people who worked in these difficult postings actually had in getting about.
Yeah.
And that's the fact that communication only works for about 3 hours a day and all that sort of thing. If you haven't been there and seen that and spent time to negotiating these things, then it can get frustrating at our end. What haven't you replied for 6 weeks? Because I haven't been able to get out of the town for 6 weeks.
So when you came back to UK, Les, what were you doing within DTI when you were back in the UK? After
Well, I wrote my kind of visit reports and all that sort of thing, and carried on trying to chivvy people to bid for the aid pots.
And I mean, obviously you've got considerable experience of seeing the evolution of a government department. And I mean, as you will know, DTI has had many faces and names over the years, because it seems to be one of the ones that's always very popularly rebranded with consecutive governments, say, Board of Trade, Department for Trade and Industry, etc., etc.
Well, yeah.
What would you say? I mean, during your time, how did you see it evolve? I mean, was it always linked to the government business agenda, or was it it managed to withstand changes of political government? I mean, what would your observations be on the evolution?
Well, I assume you've seen the kiddies TV thing, Transformers.
Yeah,
I know the film you mean.
Because that was. I mean, the DTI was actually a construction for one of Harold Wilson's mates in the late 1960s, wasn't it? Various bits of other government departments were all kind of bolted together.
Yeah.
And on an almost weekly basis, it seemed to me that something would be unbolted and built somewhere else, and other bits had bolted back onto it. I mean, there was the one famous weekend where the small firms unit came from the Department of Employment to us. And then about 6 months later, it was unbolted and given back to them and stuff like that. It was.
But then didn't it have quite a lofty rebrand under Heseltine? Because he was, I think he wasn't he president of the Board of Trade or something?
Yes, that was the department. Yes, that's right. What it was. Dear me, was he before Lord Young? Lord Young turned us into the Department for Enterprise, or as I preferred to call it, the Department for Advertise. because that was all it was. I mean, he just gave us a new logo that, depending on how you looked at it, was either somebody shagging a horse or somebody sitting on a tractor. But
That I have all sorts of vivid imagery of that description. There's now.
now you probably don't want to retain them for too long.
Well, I was just thinking, you one we said here, what are your proudest moments? And you said that you didn't want to take credit for anything. But tell us about, you were involved very much in a lot of work, like work associations and football and cricket and all those sorts of things. Can tell us about that side of your working career, and how that really, what did you enjoy about all of those staff associations and those?
Well, the trade union stuff essentially was doing right by people who'd been done wrong, and but also to make sure that, particularly once things got rockier with the government, and it's starting to get petty and vindictive about stuff, that there was at least a voice for the people who were at the bottom of the pile, particularly in relation to pay negotiations when the Whitley system was effectively dismantled. That's the. I mean, I suppose on the trade union side of things, that the thing I wouldn't be proud of was that we actually managed to introduce, in the face of all that, career breaks, particularly for women.
That's so cheap.
That was for want of a better phrase, my baby.
How did that come about? Tell us about.
Well, it's essentially because we had. I mean, it's commonly known in those days that women went off to have children, and then they took time out to raise the kids. So they always had anything between sort of 5, 7, 8, 9, 10 years left service that they could accrue. But if you could negotiate a deal whereby they could maintain contact and not lose out in some way, and then they could come back rather than having to reapply, there would be something there for them to return to at the end of that period of anything between, well, I think if I remember right, the maximum was 7 years that I managed to negotiate. But within that time, then every few months or so, you'd come back for a week or so and sort of maintain contact, keep your hand in, and all that sort of thing. And we managed to get that over the line. So I suppose I should be proud of that.
Well, I think you should be proud of that. That's excellent. Because what I was going to ask you was, I didn't realize, when the ladies had children and that, did they have to reapply for the job? Were they effectively removed from the service, like sacked? Excuse me, that's the word I'm thinking of.
Off the top of my head, at this distance in time, I genuinely simply cannot quite remember precisely what the aggravation was.
Okay.
But certainly my objective was to make it a much easier path back.
Well, that's great. And
well, it was a two-way street. Yeah, but it didn't end up being a one-way street. That it was.
Was that quite a mountain to climb, though, Les? I mean, did you? I mean, obviously, to persuade people who needed to be persuaded. Did it take quite?
Well, yeah. Again, although I say it was my baby, there were other people who were full-time officers as opposed to senior lay officers, who kind of sort of helped me along. But
what was the social life like? I mean, obviously you mentioned about you were very involved in sports activities. Was it a good social environment working in DTI? Because
it was.
One of
the
departments,
I mean, my very first
said that they had a wine shop, or a wine club that they had for staff who.
Oh God, yeah, the guy who was in the civil service choir. I've forgotten his name. Yeah, he was there. Yeah, I mean, my very first Friday when I was at the Proudest office, my SEO, who had been my boss's boss, that poked his head round the door and said, "Do you fancy a drink at lunchtime?" So, it's the Pope a Catholic. Well, actually, the answer to that is not necessarily, of course, but he might be a metropolitan, he might be a patron. But yes, there was a fairly I mean, the social
Where
life.
was your favourite watering hole, Les? Was it
No,
one
at
of
that
the,
time it was called Haneke's Wine Bar.
is that off Whitehall?
No, that was opposite the Pound Copy with Don Hoban.
Oh,
Nowadays, I
Holborn.
think it was a Sam Smith's pub. Nowadays, called I think the City of York. City spelt CITTIE and York with an E on the end. I kid you not. But it sold Sam Smith's old brewery better, so you couldn't really go wrong.
So you used was that a regular staple on a
Oh
Friday?
yes, it was. Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting you
Every
say
Friday.
that. Friday. I mean, my background was working in magazine publishing, and I used to work quite close to Blackfriars Bridge, where there's a lot of big publishing companies, and there was a secular pub on the corner of
Well,
Blackfriars,
there was the Black Friar, wasn't there?
which was on a Friday when I was a young journo in a publishing company, was full of everyone from the publishing industry. Nobody did any work on a Friday afternoon. They would decamp to this pub on the corner of the bridge and basically do all their networking and talking and swapping tips, etc., over a swift half or 4 or 5, but wrote off the rest of the afternoon. I mean, but presumably, of course, you went back to the office after your
Denise is pretending to look shocked.
She's worked in local
I must tell
council.
you, actually, talking of those sorts of things, and this was actually quite a shock. When my father died, I had to go to the probate office, which was on Holborn, and I discovered, to my astonishment, that State House, which is where I'd moved to at one point, quite a lot of the patent office had decamped from the old Southampton buildings while there was a refurbishment. The State House was no longer there. But on the corner opposite State House was a little tiny pub called the Old Red Lion. And because I'd made my way up to my appointment much more quickly from Waterloo than I thought I was going to, I thought I'd just walk in and have a quick pint and sort of relive some old memories and all that. And the door was on the corner, so you walked in, and there was a television up there, and I saw this plane flying into the side of a building, and I said to the
9/11.
It was 9/11. I said to the barber, it's a bit early in the day to show disaster movies, isn't it? And he said, no, that's really happening. He said, it was 9/11.
Wow.
And that in that instance, I think, is one of the last moments that everybody knew where they were when that happened.
It's like a Kennedy moment.
Exactly, because now, of course,
And one of my trade union compatriots, while I was in The Hague, a lass called Angela O'Connor had been doing her time in New York. She was based in the Twin Towers, in our there. And that would have been one of the days that she would normally be in the office, but they changed her. So, I mean, that's there, but for the grace of God job.
Yeah.
She
There were
happened
so
to be out
many
on the
examples.
road on a day when she would normally have been in the office.
Wow.
Fate smiling in the right direction there.
100%.
Oh, yeah.
So talk to us about, I mean, obviously, I think in 2010 you eventually left the civil service.
Yeah, I was made officially superfluous.
But I'm fascinated in when you gave your pre-answer survey, you said you were farmed off to a cowboy outfit called Iron Mountain. What?
Well, yeah, they basically privatized the archival side of stuff.
Oh, I see. So it was given out as a contract.
Yeah, as I understand it, there were 2 people left who did what we called second review.
Right.
It was.
And I mean, presumably, had that not happened, you would have been happy to stay put, or were you at that point? Now's the time I feel I need to go.
I would have been, yeah. I mean, I think I would have been. If there had been some plans that we would be relocated to a place up in Swadlincote on the edge of the Peak District. I think I could have dealt with living near the Peak District. But in the end, I'm not quite sure exactly where it all went to, and a couple of the chaps stayed with it. And went and worked in headquarters building in 1 Victoria Street, while most of the rest went and I really can't remember anymore. Yeah. I did actually come back briefly for a while, but it wasn't much fun because I was dealing with. Anyway, that's for later on in the interview.
No, tell us.
Oh, because you've got people who didn't know what they were doing. I mean, they'd never heard of Tata Industries. I mean, you've dragged these kids in off the street and they're looking at fundamentally quite important stuff to do with the European Regional Development Fund's Objective 1. And, well, I mean, that's the sort of stuff that I should be dealing with. But if you can't have people dealing with papers that tell the story of the department if they've never even heard of one of the biggest industrial conglomerates in the bloody known universe, can you?
Yeah, but that's also to do with the schooling, Les, because a lot of people, especially in that period of time, think about 1980. That was when we had our manufacturing effectively eroded.
This was 2010, and well, more or less 2010. And we had people in charge of us who were not information scientists and had no real kind of feel for what we were doing. They had no kind of philosophy of what we were about, and thought that you could just do this by a simple process of, oh, this looks important, doesn't it? Well, actually, no. Stuff that doesn't look important quite often is, and stuff that does look important quite often isn't. It's a matter of having some kind of historical perspective. That's why we used to get lots of retired senior civil servants, people who'd been round the block. And as much as anything else, it was knowing who to ask questions of. One of the chaps that we had with us, I'm still in touch with him. He's a good friend. Used to work at what was known as the Warren Spring Laboratories. He helped write official histories to do with the oil industry. So if you had anything to do with that, you'd go and ask Dave. Dave, you used to do this. Who are the people I need to contact? Who are the people I need to look out for? Who were the people who drove whatever it is I'm looking at?
A fundamental change of culture, because the actual department was no longer, in a way, working with its cultural history, in the sense that you just explained how it used to work. It was about banks of knowledge, individuals who had that. Now, what we're interested in is streamlining the process. We're not interested in what went before. This is what we want to do. This is the process. And therefore, you need to bring in people who don't have the mindset of, we need to use the system that we've had in the past. The CSRF, the Civil Service Retirement Fellowship, is a charity set up for civil servants by civil servants. In 1960, Douglas Houghton MP highlighted the need for an organisation that supported retired civil servants, offering friendship and companionship. 59 years later, we are still carrying on his dream. You can find out more about the CSRF at our website, www.csrf.org.uk. Why not sign up to become a digital donor for £3, less than the price of coffee? Or you may wish to volunteer. Contact us via the website.
And the system is perfect, and you can always tweak it. That's what staff inspections were all about.
But I think you raised an interesting point, though, with both the observations. Is that I think one of the not faults, because that's probably a negative phrase to use, but I think one of the changes, which I think is a shame, is that there's a loss of knowledge now. And there's a big gap of the people. I mean, obviously, the civil service has sort of replenished itself several times, certainly in the time I've been with the CSRF, and during which time they've lost people who have that years of experience, knowing where things are, knowing where to go to get answers to things, which they will never get back. And in some respects, some areas don't seem to even be bothered about that or want it back. You know, they just accept the fact that,
the Windrush thing is an example of that. We were talking earlier on about lists of people with the card index. You had somebody who looked at that who had no idea what it was.
Yeah.
And how many people who had their lives completely, in some cases, terminated because some idiot didn't know what they were looking at.
Exactly.
Nor did they feel that there was anybody they could go and ask.
Yeah, which is equally much of a problem, is the fact that somebody who looked at it didn't know what it was, didn't think, oh, I can go and ask my, whoever it is what that is and make sure that we don't throw it away before we've checked we shouldn't,
I mean, and while I'm on my soapbox about this sort of thing, I mean, when we had people who were information scientists who understood that just because the place looked as though it was being run a bit like a gentleman's club didn't mean that things weren't getting done. That if somebody is sitting on the edge of somebody's desk having what appears to be a chat, the person who replaced Stella Wood, who was only, it seems to us, recruited because she had a history of managing large teams of people, couldn't grasp that just because I'm sitting on the edge of somebody's desk, I've got some papers to do with the post office. But I'm speaking to Mike Lunn, who more or less single-handedly, as an assistant secretary, was responsible for making sure that the post office wasn't privatized about half a dozen times. But he doesn't grasp that I'm talking to him about that.
Exactly. And there have been so many occasions, Les, not just obviously in the experience that you give, where the people in whatever positions, management positions, think it's a clever idea. Oh, well, we must bring in people from the private sector because clearly they're going to be far more efficient or understand better how departments work. And it never works. Because yes, we all accept that there are efficiencies and there's a need to ensure that systems run properly. But equally, you can't just take one thing from a different area and expect it to be crowbarred in to something else and it's going to run smoothly. Because
we lost count of the number of times that people were brought in and just to burnish their CVs would say, I implemented this, that, and the other. And it left the rest of us to clear up the wake of destruction left in that path because it didn't need doing at all. And you simply ended up putting stuff back where it was in the first. And that's not just kind of reactionary nonsense. It's just that if it ain't broke, you don't need to fix it.
Quite.
I think what people don't appreciate with the civil service is that often we only see the front of house in terms of the people who are on very good pensions or they're permanent and private secretaries, but people don't appreciate that the local job centre in the shopping centre is actually civil servants. And they don't look at things like that. They don't see it in that capacity. And I think that's one of the really important reasons that this podcast is important, is because it's not about the shiny private secretary. It's about the number of individuals who, in effect, the civil service is one of the biggest employers in the country. That and along with the public sector. And those individuals don't have a space to shine. And that's to me what you're saying there, which is you have no real idea of what's going on with, for argument's sake, the post office. But this person, they are so embedded in it, they fully understand it. But they're not the shiny face of the civil service. They're the person with probably a couple of ring dings on their desk with coffee cups, but they've got all the knowledge,
I've often said to people that some of the biggest idiots I ever worked with and for were the people who'd had the most expensive educations. But some of the best problem solvers I ever worked with were the more junior staff.
Have to be. When you're poor, you have to be innovative, otherwise you die.
Yeah.
And that's what happens. So that's invariably what happens when people come with that attitude. They see a problem and like, well, okay, how can I fix this quickly and fix it effectively? As opposed to, if I'm coming from a very particular...
And indeed, if there was one thing that it was a bit micromanaging, the presenteeism. If you ask somebody to do something, let them get on with it. Don't stand over their shoulder.
Very, very well said, Les. Very well. Do you remember what sort of pre-preparation you had for preparing you for retirement? Was your department very good at that, or
not particularly? We had. I mean, there used to be pre-retirement courses, which I had in my time as because I did. Can I kind of take one step back and one step to the side?
Absolutely.
I had 2 stints as a full-time lay officer in the staff side office,
Yeah.
When I left the West Germany desk, I did a couple of years as an assistant secretary, and then when I came back from The Hague, I spent a while dealing with fairs and promotions, and then got elected again as the deputy secretary for a couple of years, and my and that we used to have a stint on management and in induction programs to explain what trade unions were all about, and equally, I used to do a little sort of 10 or 15-minute slot about the retired members sections of the various unions. Because I think when I did my second stint, there were still 5 unions involved, as opposed to the just 3 now, isn't there?
Yes, you're quite right.
And yeah, so yes, we did. But by the time I was retiring, we basically had one day all squeezed up together. And I seem to remember it was run by the Freemasons.
Interesting.
Was-
So you all have one trouser leg rolled up.
No, it was because the stuff that the lady handed out at the end of the day was all to do with Oddfellows, which I'm pretty sure is something to do with the Freemasons. I mean, it was informative as far as it went. It just wasn't really enough.
Oddfellows, actually, just to be fair, it does look a bit like a Freemason. I can speak to that because when I had my magazine hat on, we did a lot of contract publishing, and I used to work as an advisory editor in chief to Oddfellows magazine when they were celebrating their centenary, and they have their headquarters in Manchester, and the origins of the Oddfellows are for anybody who wasn't naturally in a trade guild. So they go back hundreds of years, hence they're odd fellows. They don't have a natural guild to go to. So that's where the origin of that name came from. So anybody, it's a sort of a bit like a jack of trades, is where they had their trade guild. But they are very heavily into insignia. So that in their headquarters, they have all these chains of office and scarves and all sorts. So I can see why you would draw the similarity with the Freemasons.
Fair enough.
That's me doing a major sidebar. Quick part of history of the Oddfellows.
Yeah.
So could I ask you, Les, when you retired, you said that you were very active in the Labour Party and also in a range of clubs and things. Could you just give us a little bit of thoughts about that and how that's worked and, what your thinking is now?
Well, I suppose it's like so many people they got busier when they retired than they were. But the local football club, the local cricket club, the retired members of the of PCS as it now is, the CSPA. There's plenty to keep us going. And indeed the local Labour Party here.
So did you ever fancy yourself as the councillor?
I have stood a few times, but well, it's got to be done, hasn't it?
Absolutely, I agree. I was a councillor for 12 years. Yeah, in my area.
Yeah, I mean, when I lived in London still, it was in Bromley, so you had no chance, really.
If
it's the same as round here, you've got no chance.
Well, BT option 1, Les, friends and family only.
Yeah, it was something I discovered at the last general election.
Yeah.
Because I'm a member of the Electoral Reform Society as well, that the New Forest West constituency has only once ever returned a non-Tory councillor, and that was back in 1914.
And what was the reason for that? Or was it was just
the Boundary Commission?
Yeah. And he was I don't know exactly why they returned a Liberal, but he didn't last very long. He lasted just one parliamentary term, but it was it's fairly affluent, rural, and for the places that aren't affluent, they doff their cap to the people who are. Honestly irritating.
But do you presumably still feel as actively passionate about the causes that you were passionate about when working, even more so in retirement, because there are still battles to be fought and campaigns to be run?
Well, certainly, yeah. I mean, I'd be my time in The Hague, for example, sort of dealing with exports, trying to persuade the Dutch to export to the UK, us to buy off the Dutch, and vice versa, and all that sort of thing, acting like a kind of marriage broker. That I mean, I found that was great fun and hard work. It's particularly hard work if you're having to be polite at receptions to people who are completely.
We've all been there, Les.
And indeed, when the commercial counsellor is a dickhead, because I think David is probably aware that the mother's side of my family is Dutch.
You do know, Les, we're going to have to put a parental advisory on this episode.
Get more hits on this one, Dee, than the rest.
Exactly.
But it was. I mean, actually, there's another amusing story around that, because I had originally, when I'd applied and had the interview for overseas attachment, I having gone from working on modern European industrial society, Germany, and then gone to some of the poorest places in the known universe. One of the questions they asked me was is there anywhere that you think you could go that was a halfway house where you could make use of your German? And so I said Paraguay.
I don't know.
Well, because an awful lot of Nazis fled to places like Paraguay. I mean, after the Second World War. Well, do you think there are so many Argentinians with Italian names?
Oh, okay. See,
yeah, and indeed, for one of the Paraguay's president from his surname was Sturzer. But anyway, in the end, I was earmarked to go to New Zealand. And in the days when headquarters building actually had a bar, one of the guys I'd played cricket with, who actually ran the overseas attachment scheme, Brian Doherty, lovely man, very fine batsman, and he was in a particularly foul mood. So I said, "Come on then, Brian, tell your uncle Les what's the problem." And apparently, the guy who was due to go to The Hague had decided that the accommodation he was being offered was not up to what he considered up to his standards. And so about 6 pints later, I agreed to go to The Hague at about 3 weeks' notice. And I had absolute whale of a time. It was the ambassador's coach house, for God's sake. What more did he want? It was 10 minutes walk from the embassy up a nice leafy avenue. What did he want?
Presumably a 5-bedroom mansion in some palatial.
I had a whale of a time.
What advice, Les? I mean, obviously you've been retired for some years now, and obviously making absolute most of everything you've got available. That's very evident. What advice would you give to somebody who is approaching retirement? If you could go back and do it again, or just general tip and advice on what to do when you're thinking about retirement to make sure you make the most of it.
Don't sit at home watching daytime TV. One of the saddest things I ever came across was a lovely, lovely man who used to join us at the patent office at Friday lunchtime. It's called Bill Metcalf. And when he'd retired, he used to come back on Fridays and join us. And over a period of about 18 months, you could see him sort of slowly but surely getting a bit more haggard and a bit more. And it's because he'd never had any hobbies. He'd never had any interests outside work and home. Now, I always did. I played football, I played cricket, I played rugby, I played darts. I was always interested in current affairs and all that sort of thing. So there were always things that I was going to be doing. But Bill, in the end, said that my life nowadays consists of finding more and more long-winded ways to do my daily tasks. And that's one of the saddest things I've ever. He was such a lovely man. I really,
Sad
really
but
don't.
true, Les. And I mean, there are probably thousands of Bills, or Bettys or whoever who are in exactly the same position. And I think one of the pieces of work that we've been doing as an organization in the last 18 months is actually reviewing what are the good set of skills and tools to prepare people for that retirement. And I think we're one of the focus groups we ran last year. Someone used the word bereavement in a way, in the sense of
That was
that,
Richard, wasn't
yes,
it?
it was
Yeah.
the loss of sort of independence, purpose, all of that. That when you have spent a lifetime in a career working and knowing your colleagues, and you're literally, I mean, he gave an awful example of, he worked 30, 40 years, and he was 40 years and barely had like one line letter saying, oh, thank you terribly much for your service. There's the door. Bye bye. Don't let it shut you on the way out, sort of thing. And that's something we're very conscious. So again, a slight sidebar, but we are very conscious as an organization that as an employer, the civil service, considering the wide range of people it employs, does need to do better for its employees when they leave.
Well, the Sports and Social Association in DTI was pretty good like that. I mean, I suspect that we were quite lucky in that as a department, or that I was quite lucky in that although it was a quite small department by and large, it did quite a diverse range of things. And the sports and social side of things was very, very active, particularly on the social side, where you had at the annual craft fair photography competitions, and people kind of all mucked into that, so that it was also relatively easy if you took the trouble to get to know quite a lot of people. I suspect because I was involved in the union as well, I got as fairly well known. But it's, I mean, I imagine that if you work in the MOD or the DHSS or something like that, absolutely massive
you could get lost in the man.
The Home Office would be another one.
I mean, I think that's a neat conclusion. I mean, that sort of is a neat conclusion to our chat today, because it does reinforce the importance of, aside from enjoying the job and making the most of it in the experiences that you have, do not just focus on work. Try and find some balance to, obviously, when you do finish your career, you've got something that you can look forward. And I will take that on the chin personally, because I mean, I'm guilty on an individual basis sometimes if you're just in the one lane working. You think, oh, I haven't got time for that. I haven't got time. I'll do that later. And then before you know it, whoop, 25 years, 30 years has gone by. And you're thinking, oh, actually, I now need to do something about it, and it may be too late. So that's a very good thing. But Les, I mean, I think I would speak on behalf of Denise by saying it's been absolutely great having you on today.
I love it.
And it's been fascinating listening to your life experience, your work experience, your reflections. So a massive thank you to you for joining our 60 Voices podcast, Steve.
Still a gap, like fairs and promotions.
Oh, if we're almost at the top of the hour, so we'll have to do that as a part 2. We'll have you back. We'll have you back on, and you can go down that route and explore all of that. But I think what I would say is, obviously, aside from saying thank you to Les, anybody who's listening, we hope you've enjoyed this episode. There are plenty of other episodes for you to also tune into and listen, of people from all sorts of different walks of life in the civil service. If you'd like, or inspired by the interview you've had with Les today, to want to put yourself in the hot seat, we'd love to hear from you. And to find out more about how to get involved, go to the CSRF website, www.csrf.org.uk. If you're motivated to make a donation, we have no government funding, so do feel free to make a donation through the website. It's our 60th anniversary year. We've got a mega fundraising target, so every little bit helps on that front. And if you are a serving civil servant and you've been inspired by listening to somebody who's worked in the civil service for many years, we have a brand new category that we've launched in celebration of our 60th anniversary, which is a digital donor subscription, which is a very small amount, a very titular amount of £3 a year as a minimum. And you can sign up and make an annual contribution to help our charitable services, which include our befriending schemes, our local community groups, and our free phone help and advice, and our book groups. And of course, Les, I've not had a chance to talk about the book group, but we'll get him on for part 2. But Les is a member of our book group as well. So with that in mind, thank you ever so much for listening, and we look forward to you joining us for our next episode. So thank you very much indeed.
The CSRF, the Civil Service Retirement Fellowship, is a charity set up for civil servants by civil servants. In 1960, Douglas Houghton MP highlighted the need for an organisation that supported retired civil servants offering friendship and companionship. 59 years later, we are still carrying on his dream. You can find out more about the CSRF at our website, www.csrf.org.uk. Why not sign up to become a digital donor for £3, less than the price of coffee? Or you may wish to volunteer. Contact us via the website.